Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Istanbul Mayor Kadir Topbaş has resigned from his post earlier tonight. Topbaş has been a close political ally of President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan for the past 40 years and held his post as the mayor of Istanbul since 2004. The Turkish parliament will hold an extraordinary session tomorrow to decide whether to extend a mandate authorizing the deployment of Turkish troops in Iraq and Syria prior to the Iraqi Kurdish independence referendum.
Turkish Prime Minister Binali Yıldırım prepared a parliamentary motion to extend the mandate authorizing the deployment of Turkish troops in Iraq and Syria. The text of the motion states clearly that the attacks to the territorial integrity of Iraq and Syria are a threat to Turkey's national security, a direct reference to KRG's independence referendum. The Turkish parliament will hold an extraordinary session tomorrow to put the motion to the vote. Representatives of MHP and CHP have said that they will support the mandate. Today, the Turkish government held two important meetings to discuss the upcoming independence referendum. At 6 p.m., the National Security Council, joined by the President, Prime Minister and the Chief of Staff, alongside other major civilian and military officials, came together to discuss Turkey's response to the vote. The council will be followed by the cabinet meeting. This week, the Turkish army started a military drill in the border between Turkey and Iraq's Kurdish region. Around 100 military vehicles, mostly tanks, came near the Habur border gate as Turkey has hardened its opposition to the referendum. In the past 2 weeks, several Turkish officials have stated in official meetings and announcements that the independence referendum is a matter of national security for the country and a historic mistake. During an interview with Al Monitor, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu reiterated the international community's opposition to the referendum and accentuated their support for the territorial integrity of Iraq. Çavuşoğlu added that they had been asking the KRG to halt the process, and if their constitutional rights were the problem, they could help them to guarantee their rights, offering to be a mediator and guarantor of the constitutional rights of the Kurds. Turkish officials have expressed fury over the KRG's inclusion of oil-rich Kirkuk to the independence vote, describing the decision as a calamity. Turkey fears that a yes vote might fuel separatism among Turkey's own Kurdish population. Turkey and the KRG have strong political and economic links. For nearly a decade, the ruling AKP has championed Mesut Barzani as an alternative power to the PKK in the Kurdish political scene. Turkish companies have helped to build the KRG's infrastructure, and the landlocked Iraqi Kurdistan exports oil, which is its main source of income, in hundreds of thousands of barrels per day via Turkish pipelines to reach the world market.
Joining us from Vancouver, Canada tonight is Simla Moradi, who will answer our questions on the upcoming Iraqi Kurdish independence referendum. Moradi is a journalist who has reported from Erbil for many years and who has worked in the region extensively. Good evening, Mrs. Moradi. Welcome to This Week in Turkey.
Good evening.
So let's start with a last-minute development that came from the National Security Council meeting, which ended only minutes ago, actually. So the tone of the statement that was published after the meeting is quite bold, as the Council has concluded that the upcoming Iraqi Kurdish independence referendum is illegitimate and unacceptable. How do you evaluate the statement?
Yeah, it's strong. It's a strong statement, as you said. However, if you look at it, we can see that it's almost a summary of what has been said so far by Turkish officials about Kurdish referendum. I mean, it's been called illegitimate and unacceptable. And again, it's been called as a grave mistake, which President Erdoğan and Prime Minister Yıldırım have said so many times in the last few months. The only important part is Turkey. The statement was saying that Turkey reserves its rights originating from international and bilateral agreements. So that part is important. And what can be those rights? Of course, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is military intervention rights. And Turkey has a bilateral agreement with Iraq that allows Turkey to enter Iraqi territory up to 10 or 12 kilometers in the case of imminent attacks. However, in this case, it's hard to talk about an imminent attack of whatsoever. But tomorrow, again, we will see the Turkish Parliament will extend this mandate to deploy Turkish military outside Turkish territory, especially in Iraq. But like I said, I mean, these bilateral agreements do not necessarily involve that type of military intervention, which we can, I mean, it doesn't involve that type of military intervention. And besides that, one important point, I mean, Turkey has so many leverages on Kurdistan. I mean, for me, it was important to see what would come out from this meeting, because Turkey could have said, okay, we are shutting down the border with Kurdistan, with Iraq, the Habur border, or they could have canceled flights, or even like they could have taken some diplomatic measures. But this didn't come out from that meeting. So I think this is an important and critical detail statement.
So as we've watched in the previous news video, and as you've talked about yourself in your previous response, the parliament in Turkey is voting a very important motion tomorrow to decide whether to extend the authority of the Turkish state to launch cross-border military operations in northern Iraq and Syria. So let me ask you, first of all, what's your prediction on this vote, and what do you think the consequences will be for the region?
You know, when we talk about this military mandate, like this mandate, at this particular point, it seems like a war is around the corner. But when we look to the past, we see that's a routine. I mean, Turkey always had that mandate. Turkish Parliament always gave that mandate to government to send Turkish troops to foreign countries because of PKK. I mean, has been the threat for years, and this mandate has been there for years too. And besides that, Turkish army is already present in Iraqi Kurdish towns, in Bamarni, and they have a base in Bashika, close to Mosul. So it is not something extraordinary. Well, in my opinion, I mean, it's not extraordinary. However, of course, the timing is really important, and it tells a lot. It's just on the eve of Kurdish referendum, we see this mandate. However, I think a military intervention is not in the agenda, cannot be in the agenda. It's not so easy. That's what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. So next in line, we have a news video on the UN General Assembly and Security Council meetings and the Iraqi Kurdish independence referendum. We'll watch the video and then we'll be back with you in the studio shortly.
The Iraqi Kurdistan independence referendum was on the agenda of the world leaders during the United Nations meetings held this week. Yesterday, the Security Council shared an anonymous statement expressing concern over the potentially destabilizing impact of the Kurdistan regional government's plans to unilaterally hold a referendum next week. The 15-member council warned that the vote could weaken the fight against ISIS and hinder efforts to help refugees to return to their homes. The Council expressed continuing respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and unity of Iraq and suggested dialogue and compromise as a way to figure out existing issues. On Wednesday, the foreign ministers of Iraq, Iran, and Turkey held a trilateral meeting in New York prior to the upcoming independence referendum of the Kurdistan regional government. In the joint communique issued after the meeting, the ministers registered their unequivocal opposition to the referendum and expressed their concern that the vote might threaten hard-earned gains against ISIS. The ministers also said that the referendum is unconstitutional and might provoke new conflicts in the region and urged the KRG leadership to refrain from holding it. The referendum was also discussed in the meeting between President Trump and President Erdogan. According to the written statement of the presidency of Turkey, during the meeting, both countries' leaders expressed that they were against the referendum, planned to be held on September 25th, and stressed that such a step would have serious consequences. During his speech at the UN General Assembly on September 19th, President Erdogan reiterated that the insistence of KRG on holding the referendum might lead to new conflicts. Bid for independence could spark new conflicts and must therefore be avoided at all costs. We urge Iraq's KRG to abort the steps they have taken in that direction, said the president.
Welcome back, Mrs. Moradi. So as we've just watched in the video, the Iraqi Kurdish independence referendum was on the agenda in the UN meetings last week. And more importantly, the Security Council, as we've just heard, issued a unanimous concern over the, I quote, potentially destabilizing impact of the referendum, of the upcoming referendum in the region. So could you explain for us why such hesitations seem to be in place against this referendum?
Well, before answering that question, I mean, first of all, I find it really almost absurd that this referendum is called to be a destabilizing factor. Because already this region is not stable. It's been unstable for years. So how more unstable can it get? That's a big question mark. But of course, I mean, if I look at the reason, I think the reason is if Kurdistan goes for independence, it will shake the whole balance in Iraq. And Iran will have a very strong influence in Iraq. So I think that's one of the reasons why, especially United States, doesn't want Iraq to split or doesn't want any change in the current political equilibrium. And in United Nations Security Council, they are obviously very active and they are very influential. So it's not a big surprise that the vote is anonymous. And but the only thing, I mean, I would think that Russia might have voted differently, maybe because of the recent deals with Rosneft. I would think that Russia is sort of takes a softer stance regarding the referendum. However, still they voted against the referendum in the United Nations Security Council. So that's, for me, a surprising part, I can say.
Mm-hmm. And a new development that came today was from the part of Masoud Barzani, who made some very strong remarks about how committed and determined they were about going on with this referendum. How do you evaluate the remarks that came from Barzani today?
Well, actually, I think that remark today, the speech he made in Erbil's Franco Hariri Stadium today, basically showed us that there is no stepping back from referendum. It is starting. There will be no postponement. And actually, right now, the news came that the first vote has been cast too in China. You know, the diaspora Kurds will participate in the voting too, and the first vote has been already cast. So the referendum basically has started as of half an hour ago. So Masoud Barzani's speech was also reiterating that they will go ahead with referendum because there hasn't been a proper alternative suggested to them, proposed to them. And that's important. The other thing is he also emphasized that after 25th of September, after referendum day, they will still be continuing to have a dialogue with Baghdad. That's really important because this referendum, after this referendum, we won't see an immediate declaration of independence, but we will see a process of dialogue. And if we look at what Iraqi Foreign Minister Ibrahim Jafari said in New York recently, we also see that he is emphasizing dialogue. So, yeah, Haidar al-Abadi, Iraqi Prime Minister, said even the military options are on the table. However, the Foreign Minister, Ibrahim Jafari, has just stated that actually we will continue the dialogue after referendum 2. So, in my opinion, it will go ahead. Referendum will go ahead. It's obviously started. And after that, we will see a process of intense negotiations with Baghdad.
As we've heard in the previous news video, the UN, in his speech in the UN General Assembly, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan emphasized, he really underlined that the insistence of the Kurdish regional government to go on with holding the referendum might lead to new conflicts. And in one of your previous responses during our dialogue, you also said that it looks like war is around the corner. So my question to you is, how likely is a new armed conflict to emerge in the region as a result of this referendum? Or let me reformulate it this way. Is another war really around the corner?
No, actually, I was trying to emphasize that I don't think that an immediate war is around the corner. I don't think so. I mean, there can be clashes. Even in last week, south of Kirkuk, we saw that there were some clashes, and there was an increase in Haçlı Şabi forces, Shia militia forces in south of Kirkuk, especially around Tuzurmatu. We've seen that, but I don't think a war is likely. However, of course, this is a region which is very tense. Right now, even a war is going on south of Kirkuk, west of Kirkuk, in Havice. Iraqi army and Haçlı Şabi forces are trying to liberate the last remaining pocket under ISIS control under ISIS control. They are trying to liberate that area. So I don't think another war can be afforded by any of those sides. However, especially Tuzurmatu, south of Kirkuk, is an area populated by Shia, Sunni, Turkmen, Kurd, Arabs. So that area is very fragile. That has been always like this. So over there, we might see an increase of tension, but I don't think a war is around the corner.
You don't think it's affordable? Would be a way to put it.
No, I don't think so. Neither for Baghdad nor for Erbil.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Moradi, for your comments and for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan traveled to New York this week to speak at the United Nations General Assembly and to hold a meeting with the US President Donald Trump.
President Erdogan concluded his 4-day trip to New York yesterday. Erdogan, who was in New York to give a speech at the UN General Assembly, also met US President Donald Trump on the sidelines of the annual UN gathering yesterday. On the first day of his trip, the US authorities' decision to block the sales of arms to Erdogan's security guards was under the spotlight. The US Senate voted on Monday to block the sale of $1.2 million worth of arms to President Erdogan's personal security guards, finding that such a deal would have effectively endorsed their history of excessive force. Following his speech at the UN General Assembly on Tuesday, Erdogan held a meeting with Trump yesterday. At the start of their meeting in New York, Trump praised Erdogan as a friend and said that the president was running a very difficult part of the world. While hailing the two countries as the closest we've ever been despite recent turbulence, Trump added that Erdogan is involved very, very strongly and that he's getting very high marks. We are going to conduct a bilateral meeting with my dear friend Donald, as well as a discussion between the delegations, Erdogan said ahead of the meeting. The leaders agreed to enhance cooperation to resolve regional issues and continue the fight against all terror groups with determination, the Turkish presidency said in a statement after the meeting. They also expressed their objection to the planned September 25th independence referendum by the Kurdish regional government, stressing that such a move would have serious consequences.
Our friend Sinan Akgünay did an exclusive interview this week with Mona Alabi from the Atlantic Council on the final stage of the Syrian civil war.
Okay, so firstly, I'd like to underline that Eastern Syria has a lot of importance, a lot of geopolitical importance. Firstly, the regime and the Iranians are very intent on taking back the area because 2/3 of the Syrian oil is located in this region, and it also has a lot of gas resources. And Iran's calculations in East Syria is that they want to link Tehran through Iraq to Syria and to Beirut. So basically, Iran has two pathways to Syria via Iraq, either to the Sinjar, Tal Aqar, Hasaka axis, and another through the Palmyra axis in the south. So Iran wants to establish this pathway. It's very important to it, which can explain the confrontation between pro-regime forces and the SDF, which are backed by the United States. I think, there have been talks between the Americans and the Russians about limiting these clashes, but the possibility is still there. there are still questions. I met a few days ago Commander Hezbollah, and there is still question whether the pro-Muslim forces will push towards Raqqa. So according to what he told me, he said they didn't have orders yet to be pushing towards Raqqa.
Turkey's current high school entrance exam, known as TEOG, will no longer be held following a statement published by the Ministry of Education on Tuesday.
It was announced by the Education Minister İsmet Yılmaz on September 19th that Turkey's current high school entrance exam, known as the TEOG exam, will no longer be held. In a public statement on Tuesday, Minister Yılmaz stated that the removal of the TEOG exam clears the path for Turkey. We have treated our kids as racehorses. Our intention is sincere. We will take Turkey into the 21st century. When responding to a question on how TEOG would be replaced this year, Yılmaz told the reporters that the ministry is still working on it. The proposal will be presented to the cabinet and the decision will be presented to the people. The issue was initially brought to the country's agenda last week by President Erdogan. Don't we have lacking in national education? Yes, we do. We will overcome those. For instance, I don't want this TEOG thing anymore, and I find it wrong now. It needs to be removed, Erdogan said. Commenting on the decision, the deputy chair of Republican People's Party CHP, Veli Ağbaba, argued that the government's real intention is to pave the way for Imam Hatip religious high schools. Ağbaba noted that in the current system, students who are unable to enter science-focused or regular Anatolian high schools are enrolled in Imam Hatip high schools. Now, in a system with no exam, they will want to direct at least half of the students in middle schools to Imam Hatip. CHP Vice Chair responsible for education Lale Karabıyık added that the president is not an educator. Even if TEOG is being lifted, its replacement should be the result of serious discussions among educators. The TEOG central examining system had been introduced by the AKP government only in 2013 amid heavy criticisms by the opposition parties and education unions. Each year, around 1.2 million students enter this exam to be placed into high schools.
The Zaman Daily trial continues.
The trial of 30 defendants, including prominent journalists Şahin Alpay, Ali Bulaç, and Ahmet Turan Alkan, accused of having supported the failed coup attempt of July 15th, began on Monday in Istanbul. In the first meeting, Şahin Alpay, a former columnist who had been jailed since last summer along with 21 others, expressed regret for writing for the now closed newspaper Daily Zaman, which had close links to the network of US-based preacher Fethullah Gülen. He said he was not aware of the illegal side of the Gülen network until last year's failed coup attempt. Another Zaman columnist on trial, Ali Bulaç, also said he never thought the network would attempt a coup and demanded his release. Bulaç denied allegations of being a member of the network, saying if he was one then he would have gone abroad like many other Gülen sympathizers in the media who fled the country months before the failed coup attempt. The Chief Public Prosecutor's Office in Istanbul demands 3 aggravated life sentences for each of the defendants on charges of having links to the Gülen network, which is accused of attempting to overthrow the Turkish government, the constitution, the parliament, and to prevent its activities. The indictment said that Zaman, which was founded in 1986, was entirely taken over by the Gülen movement and sustained by money that came from the members of the group. The daily was closed down by the state in May 2016 after being seized by the government. The prosecutor's indictment said that the Gülen movement had used the media as a weapon to manipulate the society, adding that Zaman employed columnists with ideas that could have supported the organization. The court refused the demand of the defendants to be released. The next hearing will be held on December 8th.
Eurobasket 2017 ended last Sunday with Slovenia's victory against Serbia.
The 40th edition of Eurobasket, the biggest international basketball competition in Europe, came to an end on Sunday in Istanbul, following Slovenia's victory against Serbia, scoring 93-85. Slovenia, a tiny nation with around 2 million people, is champion after defeating Serbia in the championship game and defending champion Spain in the semifinals. Led by Miami Heat star Goran Dragic, an 18-year-old phenomenon, Luka Doncic, Slovenia rolled through the tournament without a loss, but it was tested late in the final, when Doncic and Dragic both exited with injuries. Led by Anthony Randolph and Klemen Prepelic, Slovenia held off Serbia for an 8-point victory. Finland, Israel, Romania and Turkey played host for the 2017 Eurobasket, which opened with a round-robin preliminary stage. The teams were split into 4 groups of 6, with the top of 4 finishers in each group advancing to a 16-team knockout stage starting on September 9. Teams that participated in the tournament include the 4 host countries, 9 countries that played in the 2016 Olympics, and 11 countries that earned spots through qualification that occurred in the fall of last year. Romania took part in Eurobasket for the first time since 1987 due to its host status. The defending champion in the tournament was Spain, which had won gold in 3 of the past 4 Eurobaskets. This time, though, Luka Doncic and Slovenia ran circles around them in the semifinals. The 20-point loss raises questions about Spain's future.
Now let's have a look at what's on in Istanbul this weekend.
Nouvelle Vague will be at Babylon tonight. A project by French musician Marc Collin and Olivier Libaud, Nouvelle Vague skillfully blends the rebellious side of punk rock and the intellectual depth of new wave with the glamour and joy of bossa nova. Including extraordinary vocal talents such as Camille, Phoebe Kilder, Nadea, Melanie Pan, and Lisette Alea, the band became famous for their covers of the world-famous artists like Joy Division, The Clash, the band performing in many famous venues such as Royal Albert Hall in London, Olympia in Paris, Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles. Toppling music charts with his magnetizing song Another Love, singer-songwriter Tom Odell will be at Zorlu PSM tomorrow for an unforgettable experience. Born in the West Sussex town of Chichester, British singer-songwriter Tom Odell studied at the Brighton Institute of Modern Music. While growing up, he listened to musicians such as Elton John, Leonard Cohen, and Bob Dylan. It's safe to say the emotional and captivating melodies he creates are under the influence of those legends.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.